Welcome back to another episode of Aquarium Drunkard's Transmissions. I'm your host, Jason P. Woodbury, and our guest this week is Chris Forsyth, guitarist, bandleader, composer, and DIY lifer. His studio albums evoke the punk psychedelia of television, balancing 70s rock grooves and loose exploratory feels a la The Dead. But as good as his studio LPs are, it might be on live recordings that his sound is best showcased. His latest is called First Flight. On it, he's joined by guitarist Dave Harrington, drummer Ryan Jewell, and bassist Spencer Zahn on stage at Nublu in New York City on September 20th, 2019. The before times, I think we're calling them. Who knows how long it will be before we can safely cram into a room to take in some live jams, but in the meantime, the 40-some minutes of First Flight should help those missing the thrills of unexpected and immersive live music. Forsyth joined me to discuss his roots, time spent studying with Richard Lloyd of television, and his motivations for opening a DIY space in Philadelphia called Jerry's on Front. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening. Before we get into the talk, I want to remind you that on September 20th, radio-free Aquarium Drunkard will be back on Dublab from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. West Coast time. Tune in for 4 hours of RFAD sounds, including Marty Sartini-Garner's Personal Sky, Tyler Wilcox's Doom and Gloom from the Tomb, and my show, Range and Basin. This month, we'll also be highlighting some of the best songs from Aquarium Drunkard's Lanyap sessions, including some selections from our new vinyl collaboration with Org Music, the Lanyap Sessions Volume 2, which you might still be able to track down at an independent record shop, but they're moving fast. Okay, so here we go. It's time for Transmissions. I'll speak with you more on the other side. Thanks for listening. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on the Aquarium Drunkard Transmissions podcast. It's real nice to have you here.
Thanks, Jason.
I want to, start off by asking you how you are navigating 2020, the strangest year that I've ever experienced. How are you hanging in, and how is the general insanity affecting your creative practice, basically?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely been the strangest year on record in my lifetime. And yeah, it's been kind of all over the place. When it started, I put out a live record with Garcia Peoples, myself, self-released, that I had planned on having come out, for months, without any sense of that live music was going to be gone, and then it ended up coming out like right when the shutdowns were starting and stuff, late March, mid-March.
Yeah.
And so it suddenly felt like this thing that, in certain circles I had been advised that live records aren't very marketable. And then suddenly it was like this unusual thing, like, oh, you can't even go see a gig anymore. And you realize You never even conceived that might be a possibility. That, we'd be sitting here, even 6 months later, and there's, it's not back to normal, and probably won't be for quite some time. So,
for sure.
I was supposed to go on tour myself. That seems so long ago, thinking about it. I'd forgotten about it practically. But yeah, I was supposed to go on tour, actually out west for the first time in quite a few years, supporting White Denim. And, I was looking forward to that tour, but, that got pulled out, obviously.
Yeah.
And then there's just like the general grind of being in Philly and the George Floyd protests and the unrest that surrounded that very much, impacted us and our lives and our feelings and our, hopes and stuff. And then, in the midst of it all, I'm still trying to kind of sort out, what it means creatively. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a bunch of other kind of well recorded live gigs from last year that I when you record them and you're like, oh, I'll get to these someday, and then it was like, well, I guess now's the time to get to them. So
Yeah,
I started,
today's the day. Yeah.
yeah, I started mixing them, and so that's been good and creative, and I love working in the studio like that and everything. But it also, in a way, is sort of, in a way, it's also kind of like looking back. It's like a retrospective thing, a live recording from 12 months ago or whatever.
Yeah.
As opposed to creating something new that then you're going to push out to sea and see what happens. But I mean, I've been as usual, just sort of collecting riffs and been preoccupied with certain things that have been preventing me from kind of getting into it. But I'm going to try to get some like long distance recording experiments going on with Ryan Jewell and Doug McCombs and maybe some other people, which we've been sort of chatting about and sort of telegraphing that we'll get to this. But that's something I'm hoping to get into in the fall.
Yeah. Well, you've obviously, you've put out great studio records, but live music is such a huge part of what you do, and you're one of those artists who there's just there's a lot of material of yours out in the world, and I guess does it feel somewhat vindicating to have all of these live recordings all of a sudden, the conventional wisdom, people don't like live records, but as everybody has adjusted to the live streams and the sort of long distance element of, nobody gets to go see shows. Does it sort of feel vindicating to some degree?
I mean, that might be a strong word, but it a little bit. Certainly, the record with Garcia Peoples, I was specifically told like, oh, it's really cool, but I don't know if that's like. He's like, I don't buy live records. Who's going to buy live records?
Sure.
And I was like, screw it. I'll do it myself then. So it's been empowering.
Yeah,
that's for sure. And it coincided with, Bandcamp kind of sweeping into the rescue and filling the void and, showing people how it's done and, kind of putting a business model out there that, is about kind of spreading the wealth and spreading the resources rather than, glomming them all up to the top.
Yeah.
And so, it's like whenever there's disruptions like this, there's going to be obviously casualties and bad things that happen and destructive forces, but there's also going to be some things to embrace as well. I think about it in a way like a metaphor for, improvising. I mean, when, sometimes when things go off the rails, you follow it, not, try to pull it back to what it was or what you want it to be or what you expect it to be. And you just have to kind of embrace the unknowns. And so, certainly I think that the Bandcamp thing has been really great, and kudos to them for really leading the way on that, and especially in the face of, the other streaming services, beyond indifference to it, out of touchness. So that's a good thing. But I don't want it to stay like this forever either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure you miss being on stage.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that I don't really tour very much. Like somebody had described, I saw something in print and someone described me as like, hard touring or something. And I counted, I was like, I played 19 gigs last year, almost all of them in either Philadelphia or New York with a few exceptions.
Sure.
But I love playing live, and it's a huge component of what I do in my mind. I mean, it's always, and also, I mean, as a performer and then also as, a listener, live is where it's the most at for me, that's like, I love recordings and you can go down the rabbit hole and, and all that. But like, I mean, that's what the rarity of experience is about, that title, which is just like, you can't bottle it, I mean, as much as you try, even like the live records, which, they're all obviously, I mean, it's all mediated. So,
sure.
but having that live experience both as a performer and as a listener is really my favorite,
Was
forum.
yeah, was the Garcia People's release, was that also pulled from the same residency performances that the new album First Flight is, or was that a different residency? Or
it was the same exact time. It was the same month. It wasn't at Nublu though. So I played I think it was a Friday at Nublu in September, and then on one of the Saturdays, Garcia Peoples came down to Philly, and we recorded that here. So it was, it's very much of a piece with it, and I think the same kind of energy.
Yeah.
And excuse me, like the same sort of like just like vitality or something that comes from that, having that kind of like focused opportunity to play the same place every week, but have it be different every time. And so we added another date to it to do the thing in Philly.
Was the sort of modus operandi pretty much the same with Garcia Peoples as it was with Ryan Jewell and Spencer Zahn and Dave Harrington, where you didn't prepare really anything? It was just sort of go on stage and see what happens, or was there a little bit more structure for the Garcia Peoples thing?
It was definitely not as free form in all ways as the First Flight group was. I mean, I didn't even know what two of their voices sounded like before the gig, like
Right.
we'd never met. With Garcia Peoples, we had played. I've known those guys for years, and we had played multiple gigs before and done some rehearsals. There's still a huge, dollop of like, let's see what happens in it, without a doubt. But we were also playing songs that had, room for improvisation, or spaces where it was like, there was no script or whatever. But there was, I think there was a set list, perhaps.
Yeah.
And the First Flight recording is just complete first meeting, off the cuff. Let's see what happens. See if we can get this off the ground,
So, that's such an interesting place for a group to find itself, a group of people to just like essentially be willing to go wherever it's going to go. And I keep thinking about that. What did you feel like going on stage that night? Was there a feeling of, obviously you knew that like everybody involved was experienced with the act of improvisation, but what was sort of your feeling stepping on stage? Is there a kind of excitement? Is there a kind of nervousness? How does it feel for you at this point? You've been playing music a long time, but what does it feel like going on stage with that level of openness as a possibility?
I spent most of the late 90s and aughts doing that,
Right.
Pretty much. Like I didn't start really doing kind of stuff that was more song oriented until the last 10 years, maybe even a little less. I guess yeah. So the first sort of rock band format record was Solar Motel, and that came out in I think 2013. So the completely flying blind thing is pretty comfortable to me. And it was nice. It was also nice to check back into that approach with all this time having elapsed and all these other experiences. And even though, all this stuff, there's always improvisation in it, but having more song structures and rehearsal and so forth, then to come into the free form thing with that kind of experience, or, that under the bridge, I think definitely changed it. And it was, like I couldn't have made this record 10 years ago, I'm sure, or we couldn't. It's a totally collective effort,
Yeah.
And it was just one of those things where I think there was just really good chemistry. We had a very brief chat. Like we kind of met. I don't think there was even hardly much of a sound check. We sort of threw our stuff up, and then I think, Spencer and Dave went someplace, and like Ryan went someplace with with Danette, his partner, and I went and got a beer or a burger or something like that. And then we all just met back before we played. And I think right when we were growing up, one of us said something like, should we talk about anything?
Yeah,
And
right.
it's like, no, it's too late for that. Like, like sometimes,
Yeah.
that's another one of those things where like you can talk too much, you can talk too little. And this was definitely a thing where like, we just got to go up there and do it. And yeah, and it turned out to be really good chemistry.
So you talked a little bit about your past, in more directly experimental combinations. Your earlier group. How do you say your first band? I've never talked with anybody about.
Well, that's part of the thing is that, I mean, we usually called it PSI,
Okay.
but we were fine with however anybody wanted to pronounce it, because there's also, the bookstore that the Fugs ran in the East Village was called the Peace Eye Bookstore.
Right.
And so there's a little bit of that in there. And that band really had more of an audience in Europe. And over there, people would say Peace Eye.
Sure.
And so often. And so, but then again, it's kind of like my last name. People, I mean, there's multiple ways to pronounce it. And I mean, there is the way that I grew up pronouncing it, but I don't usually correct people. In fact, I like the way people say my last name in like the South or in Scotland better, where they kind of emphasize the second syllable, like Forsyth.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things like we're comfortable with multiple meanings and contradictions and, holding different ideas at the same time.
I think P-Sci was my sort of that was going to be my best guess, but I figured I might as well ask you since you're here. But
yeah.
That group, and then stuff you'd done, of course, with people like Lauren Connors. You really had spent a lot of time in that experimental underground where there wasn't a lot of song forms, and I think it's fair to say like less grooving as well. Listening to this
for sure.
This first Flight record, you hear the outness of it. You hear the sort of like we could go anywhere, but you also hear a sort of foundation in a pretty like heavy groove, a kind of a rock feel where it is jammy, but it's not not traditional, jam or whatever. So I guess what I mentioned, you'd mentioned that you couldn't make this record a decade ago. Do you think that you couldn't have done it because over the course of this last decade or so, you embraced a sort of a rock and roll feel that maybe you just weren't quite as tapped into when you were experimenting a little bit more?
I mean, I've been totally tapped into rock and roll my whole life, but
sure.
I wouldn't be able to play. I wasn't able to play like that 10 years ago, I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, the funny sort of arc of my learning or my relationship with the guitar is that, I was like self-taught from when I started, and then it kind of hit this wall where I realized I don't know what the heck I'm doing. I know that I have this very strong emotional and physical pull to do this thing, but I don't know how to do it. And, I was poisoned by the punk ethos that you don't need to know the fundamentals, which, is kind of like
sure.
how punk ruined, generations of guitar players by destroying their curiosity. And so that's when I went and studied with Richard Lloyd, and he taught me all this stuff. But, it took me like 10 years to be able to process that stuff and deploy it, I think, in a interesting way. And the thing that at the time that I liked about, experimental music or whatever you want to call it, the improv kind of worlds that I was kind of circulating in, is that because, keys and notes didn't really apply, you could get into a flow,
Sure.
I would say it. And, it was about texture and timbre and dynamics and aggression or delicacy. And, those were the kind of things that you were exploring. And I mean, I just wasn't able to do that and also be able to stay in key or stay in, in a conventional form. And so I think that the way I try to think about it is with the stuff that I do that's song form oriented or more, less rhythmically abstract or whatever, that I'm trying to pull in and maintain that interest in like the surface and the textures and the dynamics. But then also, there's all this other information that you can play around with when you get into harmony and melodies and stuff, and just kind of being more lyrical.
What did your study with Richard Lloyd look like? And where were you? Is that when you were back in Philly, or were you in New York when you studied with
No,
him?
I was in New York. I moved to New York in 96, and around, I guess it was 99 or so, 98, 90, it was 98. I think it was 98 into 99, or so. There's a couple of years there where I studied with him, and I worked at a cafe on the Upper East Side, and I lived in, I guess what would now be called Park Slope, but back then it was not called that. It was just like Fifth Avenue and 11th Street in Brooklyn, just a bunch of 99-cent stores. And I would every Wednesday I would stop at his studio at the Music Building on 8th Avenue at like 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever, and have an hour-long lesson, and then I'd get back on the train and go to work. He taught me. It's not an understatement to say he taught me how to play the guitar, because, prior to that, I played in bands, and sometimes I was even like the lead guitar player in the band, but, I was completely, I didn't know what I was doing in any real way. And, I wasn't making anything very interesting out of it either. I was like, but the thing is, I realized I was like, I'm struggling here, but I want to do this. So,
yeah,
maybe it's time to like do a little homework.
Did he key in on any existing strengths that you already had as a guitarist? Because you weren't a real beginner, despite maybe your lack of theory. Do you remember him sort of saying that there was anything that you should accentuate as far as sort of your individual style that was impressed upon you?
No, he wasn't about cultivating, what I was doing. He was about just like, I'm going to turn on the faucet and tell you all the stuff that I know and see how much of it you can catch.
Sure. Sure.
So, it was utterly invaluable, but it was really kind of up to me, what I was going to do with it.
You sometimes do guitar lessons as well, right?
I do. And actually, I've been doing more since the pandemic because there's been more time, and, I enjoy it.
And you gotta, you can't play shows, so you gotta do something. How does your own teaching style, how has that developed since you've been doing more of it?
Well, it's, and the one, like I say to all the students that I have, it's, it's all, the jumping off point is all the methodology that I learned from Richard, because that's literally how I understand music and the guitar. And so, I have little lesson plans that we, work on, that starts with really fundamental stuff. But then depending on the student, it sort of branches off into different areas. Like I always say to people that, if your hands work, I can definitely make you a better guitar player. But I'm not very good at teaching people who like are absolute beginners. I feel like that's a struggle for me. But it's because that's what Richard did for me. My hands worked, but I just didn't have the information. And so he provided that.
All right, let's take a minute now to hear about our sponsor. Creators, are you tired of being paid in clicks and likes? Social media and streaming platforms might help people find your work, but they don't always get you paid. With Patreon, you can stop rolling the dice of ad revenue and per-stream payouts and grow your creative career through the direct support of the people who care most, your fans. Since Patreon is built for creators, not advertisers, you can skip the middleman and develop a sustainable income source by offering a monthly membership to your fans. In turn, they'll get access to exclusive community, premium content, and the chance to become active participants in the work they love. The creative system is broken, so if you're a podcaster, video maker, musician, writer, illustrator, a creative person of any kind, sign up on patreon.com now. That's patreon.com and change the way your creativity is valued by building the steady income stream you deserve. All right, let's get back to transmissions. There's been a resurgence in sort of interest in music that combines that, the thing we've been talking about a little bit, the sort of psychedelic rock, exploratory but groove-based thing, with the sort of more underground culture, more independent rock thing. I guess indie jam is the way a lot of people would label that. What are your thoughts on that as a term? I know that musicians notoriously loathe having to get into genre definition discussions, but at the same time, I find that one, it's really interesting, and I think that there's a lot of kind of like interesting currents happening where a couple different things might be sort of coalescing in this one sort of zone. How do you feel about indie jam? Let's just leave it very open.
I mean, on the one hand, fine. That's cool if it helps people understand what's going on. Like, I have no problem with it. But it's also sort of like real estate agents naming neighborhoods. It's just
absolutely.
I guess that's true, but it'll change in 3 years when you need to change the focus something. So, I don't know. My relationship with, the music is like super personal and emotional. And, I think this is common with a lot of, creative people in any realm, is that they're sort of like what's going through my head often. And like the reference points that I have are the things I'm trying to explore. I don't think necessarily translate overtly to the listener very often, or even bandmates, like I'll say like, oh, this song, this is like, whatever. This is like some kind of disco Stones thing. And they're like, okay, whatever.
Sure.
I don't get that, but okay. I'm fine with whatever helps people hear the music and understand it. I'm fine with it, but I have nothing invested in it.
Have you seen a sort of resurgence in interest in terms of people who maybe a couple of years ago were mostly into, like, I don't know, Pavement or something, wanting to explore sort of the possibilities afforded by improv? I mean, on a more holistic level, so. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, excuse me. For me, I think back to, also when I was in New York in the early 2000s, late the turn of the century, I guess it was, the scene around the venue Tonic was, to me, that was like my, that's the place that formed me in a lot of ways. And and the thing about that place was that, you could see Cecil Taylor one night, you could see, Thurston Moore another night, you could see Cecil Taylor and Thurston Moore the next night playing together. Like, there was always this sort of like, boundaryless kind of interest there. And, that's also around the same time that I think, the Grateful Dead clicked for me, because I was never a fan when I was younger. And I guess it was around the time those Dick's Picks records came out. And I heard one and I was like, oh, this sounds like the stuff that I hear at Tonic, except with like country songs in between or something.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. In my head, that stuff's always kind of happening. So I'm not a good assessor of the general state of people's listening habits or whatever, I think, because my own are so kind of insular and whatever. So.
Yeah, you talked about your mind being poisoned by punk. I mean, was there a point where, who were some of the punk guitarists that made
poisoned by punk?
Poisoned by punk.
Forsyth story.
That's what we're gonna name this episode. Chris Forsyth it's like an action movie, Poisoned by Punk. Who were some of the punk players that you were sort of drawn to, and did it feel like there was, at least in your own mind, sort of a dividing line between like this stuff and, let's say, Disco Stones or the Grateful Dead, or, you know, I mean, did they feel like
sure.
like rival schools to you, basically?
Absolutely. I mean, in the, you know, growing up in the 80s and even into the 90s, there was, yeah, I mean, it's inconceivable now because, you know, simultaneously, you know, culture has sort of imploded in on itself, and, like, you know,
yeah.
boundaries that used to be there have been annihilated. But at the same time, in some ways, everybody's even more in their own lane now. You know, just like everything, whether it's your political views or the type of food you like to eat. I mean, you could be completely in this one reality that is unaware of or unconscious of, or disregarding of another person's and theirs, and, you know. So, but yeah, back then, you know, I mean, I grew up listening to, you know, classic rock, basically. I didn't come from a musical household particularly, although both of my grandfathers were musicians, but my parents were not. And, you know, I mean, my dad had like some Billy Joel and Steely Dan records, you know. I mean, I didn't have much at my disposal. So, but, you know, things on the radio or that you would hear in the neighborhood or whatever, you'd hear waiting in line at the deli in suburban New Jersey, you know. And then when I got old enough, you know, into the teen years, when, you know, sort of you start to kind of define yourself, you know, I kind of drifted more towards the sort of Our Band Could Be Your Life, you know, type bands, and you know, countless nameless local ones that were sort of in that world. And yeah, I mean, that was a time when if you were into that, you were not into this. If you're into punk, you were not into the Grateful Dead. If you're into punk, you were not into metal. I mean, I remember I saw seeing Nirvana at City Gardens in Trenton, New Jersey in September of '91. And my lasting memory of it is saying to my friend, like, why are there all these guys in Megadeth shirts here? like, and that's what Nirvana did. They brought the punk people together with the metal people. And then it's like, boom, there's this huge group of people. So, you know, I mean, I'm of course in favor of, you know, I don't know, no boundaries kind of stuff, but yeah, yeah, I don't know. Nowadays it's weird because there's sort of less boundaries in a certain way, or everything's just kind of flattened. I don't know. There's also more noise. It's confusing to parse.
I sometimes think about how some of those SST bands were so weird, though, even within the context of their own of like, you know, punk. Certainly, you know, there was sort of an orthodoxy to some of the bands, but then you see the photos like Greg Ginn wearing a Dead shirt, you know, or the Meat Puppets, you know, who clearly had listened to and
classic prep school Deadheads.
Yeah, I mean, like seriously, you know, like I'm here in Arizona, so I know that those guys around here, you know, it was this bizarre thing, right, where like you could get your ass kicked for being in a punk band, you know, but like had they wanted, they could have done the country bar band thing, you know, if that, I mean, they had the chops and even the sort of interest in it, but there was this sort of like antagonistic weirdness that I really, really am drawn to. And then you hear about, you know, like, let's say Kurt Cobain, who adored the Meat Puppets, also, you know, infamously shitting on Jerry Garcia's legacy and all that stuff. And I don't have any problems with any of that, because I find it also funny and interesting the way the lines just feel so arbitrary. So now that flatness that you're talking about, it makes me wonder if, even while we're all more open-minded now, are we somehow less interesting? I don't know.
I don't think we're more open-minded now.
Well, I mean, that's a good point.
But I think what you're talking about is also maybe it's a little bit of that thing that I was talking about that I experienced with my own music, where I have this in my head. I've got like my references and the little ingredients or stews that I'm trying to make, and it doesn't necessarily come across to the audience. So like I am sure that, you know, in, you know, the Meat Puppets were listening to the Dead in the tour van, but then they went on stage and there was a bunch of 16-year-old kids that thought the Dead were stupid because the football team were all into them, you know? And so they didn't, like, but that doesn't matter. Like if the music translates, the music translates, and and then for people that want to go and do more, digging and research about it, it creates all this cool backstory or family tree stuff to trace or interest tree to trace or whatever. But
yeah,
I think that like, even when I didn't see the Minutemen, but I saw Firehose. And like, I wasn't thinking about T-Rex. I didn't know who T-Rex was when I was 16, really. I mean,
sure.
I might have known a song or two, but you hear, Watt talk about these bands that really inspired them. And I think that's also something that I aspire to. I mean, I think that's influence and synthesis. That's what really unique artists do, as opposed to mimicry or like it should be. All the flavors should be mixed up to a point that you kind of can't tell where it came from or something.
Yeah.
At least that's the goal that I think about.
Yeah, you're not supposed to hear the Blue Oyster Cult fandom in the Minutemen, but it's good that it's there because it creates this weird, this weird spice in the mix that becomes very distinctive. But when you dig around and you realize that it's there. I mean, were you the kind of guy that would read articles and interviews with people and sort of look for their reference points and then go check that stuff out?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think that's certainly how I learned about a lot of things. When I was probably like 14, the first really big band for me that was like a contemporary band, was REM. And, I learned about who the Velvet Underground were through them. So,
yeah.
Thanks guys.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I knew Lou Reed from the radio in the New York area, but like, didn't know anything about that other stuff. And so, yeah, you follow the trail, popcorn trail.
A couple weeks ago, you tweeted something that I really, really loved. It's like my favorite kind of tweet, actually, where you talked about how the production and tones on ZZ Top's Tejas album are as ahead of their time as like the stuff that Eno was doing, or some of the that kind of stuff. And I think that there's such an interesting thing where the more you think about the lines, the more you realize that whatever angle you approach from can reveal things that you don't always necessarily things make sense the more you listen, basically. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is really sort of at the spiritual core of what you've been doing on a lot of these live records. The First Flight thing, the notes actually, the liner notes or the biographical notes actually sort of indicate and hint towards the political or spiritual or philosophical underpinnings of improvisation, which is that it is one, it requires listening, like actual listening, actual synthesis of the information that you're hearing. And then also, I think, requires a certain level of ego suspension. And so it just kind of got me thinking about the real implications of improvisational music and whether or not, obviously you're not thinking about all this stuff when you're on stage. You're not wondering, like, I wonder what, political implications what I'm doing, has as you're playing a song. But I wonder if in your own life, if that's something that you think about and that you sort of are able to extrapolate from that creative practice, something that maybe helps you navigate the insanity of a year like 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that Derek Bailey's, improvisation book was really fundamental for me. Also back around that time when I was studying with Richard and hanging out at Tonic and seeing Derek a lot and getting a chance to spend some time with him. He actually booked the first solo gig I ever played for me. He was doing a night at Tonic that was like solos by people that have never played solo. And we were socially familiar with each other at that point because I would go see him play and we would talk, and he was always very gracious and interested in hanging out with people. And so he was like, "Oh, Chris, you've never played solo, have you?" That's my Derek Bailey as Sean Connery. I don't know what that was, but
I really liked it though.
but so there's that. Another thing that springs to mind is this essay that I read by George Lewis about Eurocentric music versus Afrocentric music, and he, it's I'm not going to get the grace and power of his words, but in his memory, but essentially it's like the Eurocentric version of improvisation is called chance, and it's controlled by a composer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas the Afrocentric version is improvisation. We're making it up. We're doing this thing as a group. And there's like really, really, really important difference right there, Cage is an incredible mind. I don't really listen to his music.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you're talking about is really interesting. And maybe your specific story is interesting in relation to it, because you're someone who was maybe drawn to the more anarchic sort of qualities of group performance. Then you figured out some of the rules, and here we are now, where you're able to, they're not separate worlds at this point. You know what I mean? And I think that I think that level of curiosity and that level of willingness to understand form and understand, I guess, for lack of a better term, understand the way things work musically.
I think improvisation and also these greater ideas we're talking about, it's all about how you meet the moment, and the way that, like for example, at the First Flight record, and I'm not sure if we even mentioned everybody, but Dave Harrington on guitar, myself on guitar, Spencer Zahn on bass, and Ryan Jewell on drums and percussion. And, Ryan and I played together a ton. Spencer and Dave have played together a ton. So there's a little bit of like maybe a slight head start there in the group for people. Like we had, connections. But, it's more about like working as a team, really, and cooperating. That's really what it is, cooperation, so it's like a co-op model maybe, as opposed to, top down, there's a boss and, this is how everything has to happen. But, to be able to operate that way takes a lot of discipline and takes a lot of work and takes a lot of mistakes. And, like whether, we're about to find out what kind of capacity our society has for those kinds of things, whether we have any more mistakes left. But,
we might be running out of,
Yeah, I think we are.
Of road, yeah.
I hope we're not, but I we're definitely on very thin ice. And, but yeah, I think that certainly, improvisation is kind of also how I've just always lived my life, for better or worse, and I've learned everything by kind of screwing it up once or twice. And then, as I've gotten older, I think I've gotten a little bit better about figuring out, when's the right time to, make your move or not. And
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So you, maybe a couple of years ago, you decided, we've already talked about sort of the importance of the DIY culture, do-it-yourself culture in your life. But a couple of years ago, you opened a DIY space.
Well, we call it adult DIY because it's all the good things about DIY minus all the shitty things about DIY. Like the toilet works.
The toilet works. Yeah.
It's got air conditioning. In Philadelphia, that's very important. And you're in Phoenix, or?
Yeah, I'm in Phoenix.
Yeah.
Definitely
more important.
I've definitely seen some experimental shows in like a warehouse, without AC. I've definitely seen some storage unit shows even, and adult DIY has a cool ring to it because I like running water maybe if I need that for whatever reason,
for sure.
But yeah, so Jerry's on front. What inspired you? Hey, I should open a space. I should figure out, how to do that intense thing.
There's a lot of different factors that went into it, and continue to. And in some ways, I feel that that the Jerry's project is in many ways kind of the most important thing I do, or the more important thing I do than my music. Even though music is a lifelong thing, and it's very much part of who I am and what I do, and I think about it and work on it on a daily basis. But I mean, in terms of like having some sort of ripple effect in the world that I hope is positive, and also connecting with community. So it is very much these sort of DIY ideals, but put together with discipline and mistakes. Man, we made some mistakes, but we were very lucky and very fortunate to be able to see them through. And but yeah, I mean, what initially started was not some idea of making some sort of huge real world art project. It was more like I couldn't find a good place to rehearse. And I was in one place that got shut down by the city because it was, illegally zoned and had all kinds of fire code issues. And then I was going to get another place, and it got busted by the cops because somebody had a bunch of drugs there or something. And then I just couldn't find a good place to rehearse. And so I was talking to a lot of my friends who were in a similar situation, and couldn't find a place to rehearse. And it's funny, in Philadelphia, a city, basically a post-industrial Rust Belt city, there's tons and tons of space here, but like there is not like in New York, where there are the arts and music culture. I mean, it goes obviously so through the roof to the, top of the top, mainstream professional big time stuff, but also down into the roots. It's been served and nurtured for a long time. And there's lots of both DIY spaces and also just rehearsal rooms. If you need a place to play, you can find one. And in Philly, it's not like that, or it hasn't been like that. So yeah, we just decided, and also, like I said, I'm not like a touring guy, like the conventional wisdom of the last 10 or 12 years has been like, oh, give your money away, or give your music away.
Yeah,
give your music away to the streaming services, because that's how people listen now, and go on the road for 6 or 8 or 10 months a year. And I don't want to do that. I don't think that would be good for my music. I don't think it would be good for my family. I don't think it would be good for my mental or physical health. And so, I mean, I love playing gigs. I would like to be able to play like 50. That's a sweet number for me in a year. A couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks here, a couple of weeks here, and then go home. But, so I'm not like making my living on the road like a lot of people. And so, I had to figure, I had been bartending most of my life, and I was like, can't do this anymore. So I decided to try to just do something else. And we didn't know, with my wife, Maria Dumlau, is a visual artist, and we didn't really know what we were doing, but we had a lot of and willingness to try it, and then when we got the space, we found this one space. It was small enough that we could handle it, but big enough that we could put 6 rehearsal rooms in it. And it also had this little storefront. So we were like, well, we could put another studio in the storefront, but it would be like kind of building this fortress on this, sort of well past its prime, but still commercial corridor, It's this area that, 40, 50 years ago was where everybody went to go buy their Christmas presents, and typical sort of, again, Rust Belt kind of vibe where, white flight and deindustrialization, all this stuff, racism, redlining, white flight made these conditions where the, neighborhoods imploded. But we also, it's a storefront. We wanted to keep it engaged with the street. And so we're like, oh, we can do shows here. And it's tiny. I mean, it's like 75 people. It's like you can barely breathe. But there's a place in the musical ecosystem, I think, for that that's really important, because like you were saying, you've been to shows in storage containers. Many of the most consequential shows for me, creatively anyway, happened in living rooms and basements and strange places,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean...
Squats in Italy or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it also is a reminder that as far as the ecosystem goes, um, not everybody has not everybody needs to engage with service charge insanity
Totally.
and
Or even,
or even have the ability to, you know what I mean? Like
yeah, sure.
you're not gonna ever attract more than 75 people because you're choosing to make something that has
Well, here's,
limited appeal, and that's okay.
yeah, here's another like poisoned by punk comment too. It's like Fugazi. They ruined ticket prices for generations. Because there's still people that are like, oh, it's more than $5, man. It's like, how much did a beer cost in 1989 when Fugazi was charging $5? Like $1?
Yeah, that's
75 cents.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
you can't expect things to operate without them actually being supported. And obviously the music industry is terrible at building sustainable models of anything.
Yeah,
But
not just the music industry,
except exploitation.
Yeah,
But yeah,
100%. But yeah,
but even with in Philly. So I moved here in 2009, and it's great. It's been the best 10 years of my life. But even in the time, the early teen years or whatever, like the live music scene changed here, and I would say it got more professionalized in a way, which there was good things about that, but the downside byproduct of that was also that like we realized a few years ago, or sort of around the time we were starting Jerry's, which was like 2016, 2017. It's like basically all of the gigs were now they were in bars. There was no other alternative, and even places that I like, venues that I like Johnny Brenda's. I mean, they're not really in the business of, they're not really. Their business is selling beer and selling food to people, and music is just a thing that get asses in the seats, so or in the door. And so it's it's there's again things that I like about it, but also things that I don't like about it. Like, and there's obviously financial barriers that are there too. Like, you go to Johnny Brenda's, love you, Johnny Brenda's, but like, and I hope they pull through with this. I mean, seriously,
of course.
But this is not. I'm not picking on them. It's the whole. There's clubs like this everywhere, and venues like this everywhere. But you go in and beers are $7 or $8, and a plate of food is $15 or $16 or something, and it gets expensive, and it also cuts out the access for certain people. So like we have a policy at Jerry's where the door charge is $10 minimum. I mean, it's suggested. We've never turned anyone away for not being able to pay, and it's totally fine. If someone comes in and says, look, I only got $6, cool, come on in. But like, if you're going to go and, get that $13 burrito or $16 burger, you can pony up $10 for, some quality live music by a human being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or beings. Yeah.
And you've got and you've got it sounding pretty good in there too, which is a nice bonus for a DIY space.
And yeah, that's sort of a little bit of luck as much as anything, because on the surface you look at that place and you're like, this should not sound good. There's this big plexiglass window on the front and everything, but it works, and especially when there's a lot of when there's some bodies in there, it sounds really good.
Yeah. So
the whole thing was definitely, and again, it sort of snowballed. Like, we wanted to do this endeavor. Okay, let's do this endeavor. So then you're like, how do I do this endeavor? And then you're like, okay, well, let's see. I could do what, the bank tells me to do or whatever, or I can try to, put my own values into play here. And sometimes that means, talking to the bank and whatever, and like navigating these different systems. But, that's how life is. And so it's not you can't isolate yourself off from the world, I don't think. I mean, I guess maybe some people can, but like, I crave engagement, and I like to meet people and talk to people that don't share my views or don't share my background. And, Jerry's is one way that has, I've been able to do that. And the booking policy also is not like, is every single band that plays there like my hardcore favorite band. I am not a curator. Like, there's like I'm a facilitator, you know. And so my main criteria are like, I mean, sure, I'd like to be into the music, but also it's like, is this interesting? Are these people cool? Like, are they going to be good to work with, or are they going to be a pain in the ass? And because I don't want to do it if I'm going to have to. You know, there's lots of other parts of my life where I can get into situations with people that are unpleasant and like fraught. Like, I don't want to do that at Jerry's. So, and we've virtually entirely avoided that. But as a result, I end up, you know, hearing bands that I ordinarily wouldn't, and maybe I wouldn't even like their records. Maybe I don't like their records. But you know what? They were pretty cool live, and it brought people to this place and got people into a room together. And I mean, you know, now we can. With that absence of that, we can really, you know, appreciate the value of it, I think, in its absence.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're eager to get back to it. But in the meantime, you're offering up, people can rehearse there right now, right?
Well, there's you know, the rooms are rented monthly, so they're like, or mostly. So the artists that are in there, you know, it's their space. It's like I mean, some use it for, you know, they have little project studios in there. Some it's really more just about rehearsing. Some, you know, teach or just use it to practice and write. But it's their space, so they can do whatever they want. I mean, we've, you know, we're like trying to follow guidelines and be smart and be safe. And I got, you know, hand sanitizer and disinfecting wipes up the wazoo and bag of masks at the door for people if they forgot theirs or something. But there is one room that actually there was one tenant we were renting to, which was Girls Rock Philly, which is a great organization that teaches music to, you know, girls and trans kids. But, you know, they were kind of a pandemic casualty. They asked if they could get out of their lease because they just couldn't pay it anymore. And we were hardly charging them anything. We gave them like a deeply discounted rate. But I decided that in the wake of that, I would just turn that room into like an hourly room, which they were that's how they were using it for their people, their network. Yeah. They could let people come in and use the space. So, you know, I put it out to them also, like if they want to keep coming, like they'll pay the same nominal fee. But then, you know, I know that there's other people that, you know, there's not need a room to rehearse, but don't want to have a place all month.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But it seems to me like that idea, you know, it's, I mean, it feels like Jerry's feels like a fairly natural outgrowth out of your sort of artistic ethic and your ethos in terms of what you hope to accomplish with your music, you know, and it's
yeah, I think so. And although, you know, if you had told me 10 years ago that I was going to be, you know, doing this, I would have thought you were out of your mind. I never would have forecast it. That's for sure. But then again, that's also part of the improv, point of view, you know, like deal with the situation at hand and, you know, do the best that you can with it, and then try to be creative and have a little bit of fearlessness and, you know, engage with it. Don't run from it, and, you know, see what comes out of it.
Well, that's a perfect place to wrap things up, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about all this with us here on the Transmissions podcast.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jason. It was fun.
That's going to bring this week's episode to a close. If you know someone who might dig Transmissions, why don't you do me a favor and share the show with them? There's plenty to hear in the archives, including my talk with Gillian Welsh, David Crosby, Sarah Louise, Daniel Lenoir, Jason Mantzoukas, Tim Heidecker, Bruce Hornsby, Lowe, and many, many more. The show is available wherever you get podcasts, and always at aquariumdrunkard.com. If you need more from us before next week, why don't you head over to the site and sign up for our weekly Sidecar newsletter, which features recommendations, pop culture riffs, and some of our favorite stories from Aquarium Drunkard, all delivered straight to your inbox. And don't forget, every Wednesday night on Sirius XMU Channel 35, AD founder Justin Gage brings you the Aquarium Drunkard Show at 7 p.m. California time. I'm Jason P. Woodbury. I write and produce Transmissions, which is edited and engineered by Andrew Horton, executive producer Justin Gage. You can find me on Twitter if you want to say hey or let me know what you think of the show or what you'd like to hear more of. We'll be back next week with another weird talk for these weird times. In the meantime, stay safe. Speak soon.